All right, guys, so in order to gain more experience in numerous states, which is always my goal as a habitat manager, somebody that does this for a living, in order to have experience in other states, you need to go to other states. You need to understand how deer move in different states. And I brought this up before, but deer move differently in Kansas than they do in the big woods of Wisconsin versus the hill country of Iowa or Kentucky. The southern terrain is different than the northern terrain. So in order to figure these places out, I go and I hunt them. A lot of times I hunt them and I end up on public land. And obviously hunting private land would be ideal, but the thing is you can't always get on private land. So there's generally a considerable amount of public land, no matter what state you go to, or at least enough where you can get out and at least cut your teeth on it. So in order to figure out those pieces, or I guess to learn more, the thing I do like about going public land is there's more to it. There's more terrain features, there's more edge, there's just more land a lot more times, so you're not limited. With that being said, spending a lot of time on public, and in order to find deer on public, you need to know where to put your trail cameras. So that's something I wanted to go over today, guys. I wanted to go over where to put your trail cameras and even how to hang your trail cameras. So here's the thing, as far as how to hang those trail cameras, I don't mind getting those trail cameras up 6 to 12 feet. Now this is no secret, I'm not the first guy to ever say this, I understand that, but it is situation dependent. Sometimes I'm hanging them as low as a foot, just to keep them out of the view of whether it's other hunters or deer. So that one kind of depends. If I'm hunting private land, I'm a lot less likely to actually hang my cameras high because I don't want deer to get used to looking up. In high pressure states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, different parts of other states, you don't want to be conditioning deer to look up. Public land, I get it. You're trying to hide it from people a lot of times, and so sometimes you do have to put them high. So it's not really a science, I would say, but just keep in mind that, depending on the set, get away with something, try and get away with whatever's creative, but also whatever's going to work. And like I said, with public land, you do have to try and keep them out of the hands of other people sometimes. It's sad that it works that way, but that's just the reality of the situation. So for those of you that are unaware, getting those trail cameras up high isn't a bad idea on public land. Take a stick out there with you, a screw and peg, depends where you're at, but get that camera up high out of the reach of anybody else, and also maybe it'll keep the deer from figuring out where those cameras are, because a lot of times when you get on these mature deer, it's like they have a sixth sense about them. They don't want to spend time around these cameras. You might get them once, and I've watched it myself. I had a 150-inch deer last year. He got in front of my camera once or twice, and then I saw him walk behind it, and that was actually a cell camera. So there's the thing about cameras, like you guys got to realize the cameras are probably catching about 30% of what's going on. These cameras do not tell the whole story, so don't expect them to. Don't get upset when you don't get pictures, because we've all been there, where's my buck been, whatever else. So realize that mature bucks especially will get used to seeing these cameras and know they're walking behind them. For what reason, I don't know, but they do. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation here. Where should you be putting your cameras if you're going to go to public land? The first topic I'm going to bring up, or the first place that I sometimes put my trail cameras, are on scrapes. Now, I'm not a big fan of hunting scrapes generally, but they are a good place to get intel. And why I'm not a big fan of hunting scrapes is because scrapes are everywhere in the timber. They really are. Even if it's early season, you end up finding a lot of scrapes, and if you're not seeing scrapes, you do see the licking branches being worked. You can look at those branches and see that basically the leaves are all gone, and so there's deer hitting those licking branches, communicating with one another. So those are kind of a focal point where a lot of deer are congregating at some point in time, and then you can at least get the picture of the deer, figure out there's a deer within this 40-acre area, maybe it's 80 acres, wherever, and then try narrowing it down from there. So I do like putting cameras on scrapes, but I'm not necessarily going to hunt that scrape, especially early season, unless there's a lot of daylight activity on it, which generally means you're close to the bed or the bedding area of a shooter buck. That's the one time I will hunt over a scrape, is when I know where that buck is. I know his exit trail, and I know that there's a scrape outside of it, and it's probably a good spot for him to come to, especially after a rain or any sort of weather event. They'll come and they'll freshen or check those scrapes. They'll be more likely to come and check those scrapes or freshen those scrapes probably towards October, when they're a little bit more interested. The end of October, when they're more interested in finding a breeding partner. This time of year, they're just kind of, just checking what's going on. They're not going to hit them quite as often. But as far as hunting them goes, make sure that you're hunting them if you know where the bedding area is. Otherwise, there's just scrapes everywhere and it's kind of a shot in the dark. So early season, they're not always working the ground. Like I said, sometimes they're just hitting the licking branch. So pay attention. It's a small detail that you look for in the timber, but looking for those licking branches might be a really good idea, especially early season. Like I said, again, later in October, you're going to see more of the pawing of the ground and things like that. And once again, still a good place to even put them, but these things do change throughout the entire season, so keep that in mind as well. Another one of my favorite places to hang trail cameras on public land and even private land are double-sided rub lines. Once again, not something I hear people talk about a ton, but this is generally a transition area, okay? The reason that these rub lines are double-sided is because these bucks are coming and going from a certain location. A lot of times you'll see this entering and exiting a buck bedding area. So when I'm going and hunting and I start seeing these double-sided rubs pretty consistently, now I'm slowing it down. Now I'm in hunt mode. I'm walking slow through the timber and trying to, you know, just see what's going on, pick everything apart. Every step I take, is one where I'm analyzing everything. So by putting your camera on these double-sided rub lines, chances are you're on an entrance or exit of a bed, or maybe a transition from food to bed. It's going to help you figure out that puzzle. Once again, it might be nighttime photos, but if you consistently get nighttime photos and they're coming from a certain direction, well, now you just know. Push farther back, go find that bed. So double-sided rub lines are something that I definitely like to put those cameras on just to gain more intel. And ultimately, I'm using all this to find the bed. And that leads me to the next topic, is the bed. Okay, once you maybe found the scrapes and then found the rubs that lead you to the bed, or simply you jumped the deer using the bump and dump method, which is kind of where you go in and you bump the deer and the next day you set up on them. It's kind of, it's a toss-up whether it works all the time. I mean, it doesn't work all the time, but it's a toss-up whether you're gonna have success with it. We've seen success with it on this hunt that we're actually on right now. That buck coming back to their bed 2 days later after we bumped him out of it, and a large mature deer. But once you find those scrapes and you find those rub lines, those are leading you to places. And when you find this buck sign, always think why. Look at a map, look at all these different things, and ask yourself, okay, why is this buck here? Where is he coming? Where is he going? Chances are, I hate to break it to you, most times we're not right, but it's part of figuring out the game. Sometimes you are right, and that's how you get a deer killed. So you pick up on those things, and then you can put them in the buck bed. Sometimes mature bucks don't like seeing cameras in the buck beds, and they'll never use them again. So you gotta be careful with it. You gotta make sure to conceal them, hide them, if you are gonna do this, and especially put a camera there if it's gonna be a cell camera. I don't necessarily recommend putting a normal camera in there, because if you have to go in there to check the camera to see if the buck's in the bed, well, kind of defeating the purpose of the whole hunting situation. You're going in there to ultimately just bump the deer and not really hunt. You're just trying to, I guess, get that satisfaction of checking a camera. So if you were to put them in the bed, I would definitely recommend putting a cell cam in that scenario. Topo features. Whether you're in hill country or not hill country, I like to always, I guess when I'm scouting a map, I always like to look at topo features. Now in certain places, like let's say northeast Wisconsin, you're not gonna have a lot of topo. You might only have 20 feet of elevation, but when you turn on your hybrid maps on a lot of your mapping apps, your satellite and your topo, or just your topo, you'll see lines along cricks and maybe a little slight ridge. You'll see a little circle on top. Any bit of terrain change is always a place that there very well might be transitioning or bedding going on. So that might be a good idea to check those areas out, especially in flat country when there's only a little bit of topography difference, maybe 10, 20, 30 feet elevation. Check those areas out. Most times those are areas in which you will get pictures of deer. Like I said, whether it's bedding or transition, for whatever reason, it's a form of edge. They like to use that. Even if the timber's all the same, that does create an edge, and deer are ultimately creatures of the edge. There's another video that I did put out. I think it was one of the best places or the best topo features to hunt. You can actually get a visual of what those topo features look like by going to that video if you wanted to, but you could also put your trail cameras going a little bit more in depth about those topo features. You could easily put them on the tops of draws. So draws ultimately create a pinch point at the top. These draws are so steep that no deer wants to go down and across them. They'll go up and over the top of them. And most times when you find these draws on a topographical map, you will find a trail over the top of it. A great intersecting point, a great place to put a trail camera, especially if you can correlate that topo feature or any of the ones that I'm about to bring up with a bedding area, food source, so that we can keep furthering, you know, our knowledge for what's going on in the timber, and ultimately figure out where these bucks are coming and going. The second one that I like putting them on is a saddle. A saddle is where basically, in my opinion, everybody uses a different name for different topo features, but if you're looking at a map and from 4 different angles, maybe even more, all those topo lines converge into a spot and create a flat spot. And in that flat spot, it's a natural intersecting point once again, and especially during the rut, those areas can be hot. But here's the thing about topography to keep in mind also. Deer will generally run the topo lines. There will be trails running parallel with them or on them, just because it's the path of least resistance. Like you and me, deer want to take the path of least resistance. We can be lazy, and so why go straight up a hill if you don't have to? Same reason the topo draws might be a really good spot to put cameras. So keep an eye on just topo lines in general, those saddles or the topo draws. The last one I like to put my cameras on is kind of the same as, you know, putting them in a buck bedding area, but sometimes these ridge points. If you're in hill country of any sort, sometimes these ridge points, you get bucks bedding on the points of these ridges just so they can ultimately have a vantage point, and sometimes use the wind to their benefit. Maybe have the wind coming over their back, overlooking everything in the bottom. Sometimes bucks do use wind-dependent beds. It's not a given. It's not every time, but sometimes that is the case. The other thing, or the other thing that I like to key on public land, is natural food sources, and we're sitting right next to one right now. I don't know if you can see it or not, but we got some corn, and we're on public land. Food sources are always a good idea to put your trail cameras on. Once again, just to figure out the process, where these deer are coming and going from. Eventually, we're always trying to find that bedding area where these deer are spending their time so that we can get close and get daylight activity. You might get nighttime activity out here, but at least if you get the buck on camera, you know you're close. That could be corn, that could be acorns. Once again, not a fan of hunting acorns a ton because there's acorns everywhere. What do your neighbors have? They have acorns. If there's acorns in your timber or on your piece of public land, they're kind of everywhere. So once again, you have to correlate these with bedding areas. But if you get the picture, you can start putting the puzzle pieces together and figure it out from there. The last place that I'll generally put cameras on public land are natural corridors. Those could be pinch points or whatever else, but a lot of times they're like creek bottoms or rivers. And especially when I'm in a creek bottom or a river, I'm looking for those oxbows, the sharp curves in the creek bottoms or the rivers systems, just because you do get a lot of buck bedding activity in those areas, and generally a lot of trail intersecting points. So at the end of the day, guys, just get your cameras out there, at the very least on a trail or any of the features that I brought up. And once you get them on these features, you know, try to figure out the process. Ask yourself why, and ultimately try and trace it back to the buck bedding area. Just because you got a picture of a buck one time at midnight doesn't mean you're even remotely close. Start asking yourself why. If those pictures start ending up being within an hour or 2 of daylight, there's a good chance those deer could still be going a couple hundred yards, 300, 400, 500 yards, depending on the time of the year. Maybe, who knows, miles if it's the rut. But those camera pictures that are a little bit closer to daylight, once you start picking up on any one of the different features that I just brought up, and you're getting pictures close to daylight on either side, start thinking, okay, I'm semi-close. And obviously the more consistently you get these pictures, the better, guys. And then ultimately you're just figuring out the process and hopefully having success killing a big public land deer. So with that being said, guys, those are some of my favorite places to put trail cameras on public land.